It was just past 9 a.m. on a crisp Thursday morning when the glass doors of Lexington Federal Bank swung open and a figure stepped inside, a woman so unassuming, so out of place, that half the room turned to stare. She wore an old charcoal hoodie faded by time, tattered jeans with frayed seams, and sneakers that had seen better decades. A baseball cap pulled low shadowed her face, and slung over one shoulder was a heavy, worn-out backpack. She looked like someone who had just wandered in from a bus stop, not someone who belonged inside the gleaming marble lobby of one of Chicago's most prestigious financial institutions. No one said a word. But the silence said everything. She paused briefly at the entrance, her gaze sweeping the grand space, the vaulted ceilings, the polished gold nameplates, the oil paintings of old white men in suits lining the walls. It was clear this wasn't a place meant for her. At least, that's what the stairs seemed to suggest. The woman, whose name no one cared to ask, quietly approached the ticket kiosk. Her hands moved deliberately. She pulled a number C427 and took a seat in the waiting area, where plush leather chairs and potted palms stood in sharp contrast to her threadbare clothes. She sat down without complaint, but not without pain. The room's tension thickened as she entered. A young man in a sleek Armani suit clutched his briefcase a little tighter. A woman in a fur-lined coat nudged her designer purse away from the empty seat beside her. Conversations dipped in volume. Judging eyes flicked over the mysterious stranger like she were an intruder in their exclusive world. And all the while, she kept her head down. She didn't look around, didn't fidget, didn't smile. But what no one in that room knew, what not even the branch manager in his glass office suspected, was that the woman they were quietly scorning wasn't a stranger at all. She wasn't lost. She wasn't here by mistake. She was Evelyn Moore, and in less than an hour, she would flip this bank and everyone's assumptions on its head. Not with anger. Not with force. But with truth. And it would leave everyone speechless. The moment Evelyn sat down in the waiting area, the whispers began. They didn't bother to be quiet. In fact, they wanted her to hear. Behind the marble reception desk, a woman with icy blue eyes and platinum blonde hair leaned toward her colleague, covering her mouth in mock discretion. "I mean, did she even look at the sign outside?" she muttered with an unmistakable sneer. "This isn't a soup kitchen. This is Lexington Federal." Her colleague, a younger man with slicked back hair and a navy pinstripe suit, snorted into his coffee. "Maybe she's lost. Or maybe she thinks we hand out charity now." They both laughed. Their name tags glinted in the soft light: Tiffany Grant, Senior Client Associate, and Ryan Eldridge, Relationship Manager. Names that carried weight within the branch. Names that, for the past hour, had carried nothing but contempt. Tiffany's laughter died as she glanced back at Evelyn, who sat quietly in the corner, hands folded neatly over her backpack. "God, she's still here," Tiffany hissed under her breath. "Do you think she even has an account here?" Ryan leaned over the desk, giving Evelyn another once-over. "If she does, it's probably one of those $0 maintenance ones, student checking, or whatever. Definitely not a private client." Tiffany scoffed. "No way she qualifies. She doesn't even look like she has a phone, let alone $5,000 in savings." Evelyn heard every word. She didn't flinch. Didn't move. But inside, something coiled. Something old. Something heavy. The weight of 1,000 looks just like these. It wasn't new. She had lived her whole life on the receiving end of second glances, of locked car doors when she walked past, of silent elevators where people avoided eye contact, pretending not to see her. She had learned the code of society early on: look a certain way, dress a certain way, speak a certain way, or be treated like you don't belong. But today, it wasn't just about her. Today, she was here for something bigger. Across the lobby, a young Latina mother with 2 small children tried to speak to one of the tellers. Her English was halting, but polite. "Please. I just need help with transfer. My check," not go through. The teller didn't even try to hide her frustration. She sighed loudly and spoke in a sharp, clipped tone, "Ma'am, I already told you you need to use online banking. We don't handle this at the counter. Do you not understand that?" The woman apologized softly, eyes darting downward. Her children clung to her coat, sensing the hostility even if they didn't understand the words. Tiffany, watching from the front desk, chuckled under her breath. "Another one. It's like we're running a daycare now." Evelyn's jaw tightened. She shifted in her seat just slightly and her backpack brushed against the side of one of the sleek leather chairs. Immediately, a man in a tailored charcoal gray suit sitting nearby flinched and pulled his briefcase closer. He didn't look at her directly, just murmured to no one in particular, "They really should screen who walks in here. This is a professional environment." Tiffany looked up sharply, feigning concern. She tapped the desk and made a gesture toward the security guard standing near the back. A tall, muscular man in a dark gray uniform, Officer Kenwood, had barely moved all morning. Now, he approached Tiffany. Tiffany leaned in and whispered, but her voice was loud enough to carry. "Just, keep an eye on her, okay? I don't feel comfortable. She's been sitting there for a while. Something's not right." Kenwood nodded, then turned his eyes toward Evelyn. He began to walk a slow, deliberate circuit around the waiting area, each step heavy, calculated. His hand hovered near his belt, close to his badge and radio, not overtly threatening, but just enough to send a message, "We're watching you." Evelyn could feel his gaze digging into her skin like needles. She kept her posture still. Calm. Measured. She had expected this. She had prepared for this. But that didn't make it easier. The room felt colder now. Not in temperature, but in tone. Every movement, every look, every word hung in the air like static. Even the other clients, those who hadn't said a word, were complicit. They watched her like she was an interruption in their well-oiled, latte-scented world. She didn't belong among the investment portfolios, the corporate accounts, the private banking handshakes and polite nods. She was a glitch in the system. An inconvenience. And yet, she remained. Still. Quiet. Unmoved. Because Evelyn Moore hadn't walked into Lexington Federal Bank to fit in. She had come to expose what was broken. And right now, it was breaking all by itself. Evelyn had barely moved for nearly 20 minutes. Her number hadn't been called. Her name hadn't been asked. But the eyes on her, they never stopped. She felt them circling like vultures, waiting for her to make a wrong move, waiting for her to validate their assumptions. That's when it happened. Tiffany, who had busied herself typing loudly at her terminal, more performance than productivity, stood and walked directly toward the waiting area. Her heels clacked across the marble floor like a metronome of judgment. She stopped just 2 steps in front of Evelyn and folded her arms, head tilted, a condescending smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Hi," she said, her voice laced with artificial sweetness. "Can I help you with something?" Evelyn looked up, calm and unbothered. "No, thank you. I'm just waiting for my number to be called." Tiffany's smile tightened, like it had to fight off a grimace. "Right. It's just, we've noticed you've been sitting here for a while. Are you sure you're in the right place?" She glanced pointedly at Evelyn's clothes. "The right place?" Evelyn asked, her tone still even, but there was now a glimmer behind her eyes. "A warning, maybe." Tiffany laughed lightly, as if to soften the blow of her next words. "This is the private clients division. We usually only handle larger accounts here, investment portfolios, wealth management, that kind of thing." The message was clear: people like you don't belong here. Evelyn didn't respond immediately. She just looked up at Tiffany and said, "I'm aware. That's why I'm here." Tiffany blinked, thrown slightly off script. "Well, all right then," she said curtly, spinning on her heel and heading back to the desk. "Ryan, who had been watching from behind the glass counter, leaned toward her as she returned. "So? What did she say?" Tiffany rolled her eyes. "She said she's in the right place. Probably thinks she's making some kind of statement." "Yeah," Ryan snorted. "Making one all right. About how far people will go for attention these days." Their laughter resumed, but it was quieter now, meaner. More focused. Just then, a hush fell over the room as a voice crackled through the speaker system, now serving ticket number C427 at window 3. Evelyn stood. All motion in the room slowed, like time held its breath. She walked calmly to the window, where a young male teller with dark-rimmed glasses glanced up from his monitor and immediately hesitated. His nameplate read Bradley Novak. He looked barely 25, nervous, and wildly underprepared for what was about to happen. Hi," he mumbled, eyes darting to the lobby behind her as if silently asking what is she doing here. "Good morning," Evelyn said, handing him her bank card and state-issued ID. "I'd like to withdraw $72,000 from my personal account." Bradley blinked. 70, sorry, did you say 72,000? Yes. He looked down at the card, then at the ID, then at Evelyn. His eyebrows rose an inch. "I'll, need to verify this with my supervisor." Evelyn nodded. "Take your time." He stood up awkwardly, grabbed the documents, and nearly jogged across the floor toward a glass office at the far end of the bank. Inside, a man in a tailored dark gray suit sat behind a desk, branch manager Charles Lanning. As Bradley entered and began explaining, Charles looked up sharply, his eyes cutting across the lobby toward Evelyn. He narrowed his gaze. And then stood. The door to his office swung open, and Charles approached with long, measured strides, every inch of his demeanor screaming importance. He reached the counter, gave Evelyn one look from head to toe, then turned to Bradley. "Go back to your desk," he said without looking at him. Bradley obeyed without question. Charles turned to Evelyn with a rehearsed, polite smile, the kind of smile used for delicate situations, the ones the staff were trained to handle with subtlety and quiet condescension. "Ms. Moore, is it?" he said, glancing at her ID again. "Forgive me, but we have protocols for transactions of this size. May I ask what the funds are for?" Evelyn tilted her head, just slightly. "Is that a requirement? I wasn't aware that I needed to provide a reason for withdrawing money from my own account." Charles chuckled, the sound dry and tight. "Well, we ask out of an abundance of caution. For security. You understand?" "I do," she said simply. "And I also understand that this policy isn't always enforced equally." That caught him off guard. Charles's smile faltered. "Excuse me?" Evelyn leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "I've been sitting here for nearly an hour, Mr. Lanning. I've been watched, whispered about, and nearly accused of loitering. Now, when I ask to withdraw money, you suddenly need a reason. Tell me, is that protocol too?" For a moment, Charles said nothing. Behind her, the whispers had stopped. The air shifted. Charles cleared his throat. "Well, since you feel uncomfortable, I'll expedite the process. But just understand we're just doing our job." "No," Evelyn said calmly. "You're not. But that's all right. You'll understand soon." Charles stiffened. "Excuse me?" Evelyn gave him a small smile, the kind that carried a weight no one in that bank could yet comprehend. "You'll see." And with that, she stood still and silent, letting the moment settle like dust in a sunbeam. Around her, the bank's opulence seemed suddenly hollow. The judgmental eyes no longer held amusement, only confusion. And beneath that, something deeper, the uneasy beginning of realization. Something was about to change. And it had already begun. Charles Lanning returned to his office with Evelyn's documents in hand, but his composure was already cracking. He didn't sit down. Instead, he stood at the glass wall of his office, watching her. The woman hadn't moved. She stood calmly at the teller window, hands loosely clasped in front of her, posture steady. She was waiting. And somehow, that unnerved him. He turned to his assistant, barked an order. "Get security. Now. I want Officer Ramirez up here. Tell him it might be fraud." Moments later, Officer Ramirez arrived, a broad-shouldered man with mirrored sunglasses still perched on his forehead despite being indoors. He listened silently as Charles explained. "She gave a card and ID. Claims to want $72,000 in cash. Something's off. Look at her." Ramirez didn't question it. He nodded and moved toward Evelyn. "Ma'am," he said in a firm, practiced tone. "I need you to step aside for a moment while we verify your documents." Evelyn didn't argue. "Of course," she said softly, stepping back as requested. "Do what you need to do." Ramirez took her card and ID, handed them to Charles, and stood beside her like a wall. Like a warning. Meanwhile, the lobby grew quieter by the second. Clients stopped typing. Conversations faded to a hush. Phones lowered. The spectacle was impossible to ignore. Tiffany watched from behind the counter, arms folded. She leaned toward Ryan and whispered, "Told you. I knew something was fishy." Ryan scoffed. "She'll be out of here in 10 minutes, maybe 5, once they realize what she's pulling." Bradley, the young teller, looked uncomfortable. He had gone pale. Inside the manager's office, Charles typed Evelyn's name into the system again, searching, double-checking. Her account was real. The balance was accurate, well over $1 million. No red flags. No alerts. It didn't make sense. He frowned. Something was wrong here, but not in the way he had assumed. Still, rather than admit that out loud, he walked out, ID in hand, with the smug confidence of someone used to being right even when he wasn't. He stepped directly in front of Evelyn, speaking loudly now, as if for the benefit of the room. "Ms. Moore, or whoever you really are, this kind of stunt doesn't work here. You think you can walk into a federal bank, dressed like that, flashing someone else's ID, and just walk away with $72,000? The words hung like smoke in the air. Several people gasped. One woman clutched her handbag closer. A man muttered under his breath, "Unbelievable." Evelyn didn't blink. "I didn't flash anything. I presented my ID. My card. My name." Charles laughed, a short, condescending sound. "Right. And I'm the mayor of Chicago." Tiffany chuckled behind the counter. A few others joined in, their laughter thin and uncomfortable. Charles wasn't done. "You see, we've got people who come in here thinking we're stupid. Thinking we won't notice when something doesn't add up. But I'm not some new hire fresh out of college. I've worked in this industry for 20 years. I know when something smells off." He waved her ID like it was a piece of trash. "You're not Evelyn Moore. Because the Evelyn Moore I've seen in this system is the owner of $1 million account. And you," he looked her up and down, slowly, cruelly, "don't exactly look like someone who owns anything more than a bus pass." Silence. Absolute silence. Even Tiffany stopped smiling. Evelyn finally raised her head, her eyes locking on his. Her voice was steady, emotionless. "You've made your position very clear." Charles nodded, smug. "I have. And now I'll make the next one even clearer. We're calling the police. You're going to be detained and questioned for attempted fraud, and I'll be informing corporate that you tried to impersonate one of our high-profile clients." At that moment, Ryan's phone buzzed behind the counter. He looked down, saw a message, and his face went pale. He looked up sharply. Charles?" Charles ignored him. "I've seen scams like this before," he continued. Dress down. Act confused. Try to create a scene if things go south. It's not new. Evelyn remained perfectly still. Charles turned to Officer Ramirez. You heard me. Call it in. But then Ryan spoke again, louder this time. Charles. I think you need to see this. Finally, the manager turned. Ryan held up his phone, hand slightly shaking. On the screen was an internal memo. A photo. A company-wide alert from Lexington Federal's executive office sent earlier that week. Please be advised, the message read, that CEO Evelyn Moore will be conducting unannounced visits across regional branches in a personal initiative to assess customer service standards and internal bias compliance. She will not identify herself unless necessary. The photo left no doubt. The face under that worn hoodie. That same calm gaze. Charles's color drained instantly. His mouth opened but no words came out. Tiffany gasped audibly. Ryan sat down. Hard. And Evelyn? She smiled. Just a little. A quiet storm was about to break. The silence in the bank was no longer the silence of suspicion. It was the silence of realization. The marble floor suddenly felt colder. The chandelier above seemed too bright. The ticking of the decorative wall clock became deafening. All around Evelyn, the people who had judged her now looked at her like they had seen a ghost. Charles Lanning stood frozen, one hand still gripping her ID, the other shaking faintly by his side. The arrogance, the sarcasm, the performance, it was all gone. He looked like a man who had just walked off a cliff and realized the ground was no longer there. Evelyn stepped forward slowly, eyes never leaving his. Her voice, when it came, was calm but sharp, measured like a blade. I believe you have my identification, Mr. Lanning. He handed it to her with trembling fingers, unable to meet her gaze. She took it, slid it into her pocket, and continued speaking not just to him, but to everyone in the room. I walked in here today not as a CEO. Not as an executive. Not even as a client with a multi-million-dollar portfolio. I walked in here as a woman, a human being expecting basic decency. Her voice echoed in the vast lobby, low but powerful, drawing the attention of every employee, every customer. But what I received was surveillance. Whispered insults. Mockery. I was labeled suspicious. Untrustworthy. Because of my clothes. My silence. My skin. Charles tried to interject, his voice hoarse. Ms. Moore, I had no idea. I wasn't informed. If I had known. Evelyn's tone didn't waver. That's exactly the point. You didn't know who I was. And because of that, you treated me as less than human. She turned her gaze toward Tiffany, who had backed into the counter, her face pale and twisted in embarrassment. Her arms were wrapped tightly across her chest, like she was trying to fold into herself, to disappear. You made assumptions about my worth based on nothing but appearance, Evelyn said. You laughed. You mocked. You involved security for no reason other than discomfort with someone who didn't look like your typical private client. Evelyn stepped into the center of the lobby. Now even the customers who had initially ignored her were sitting straighter, watching. A few looked down, visibly ashamed. One woman whispered to her husband, she was right there the whole time. And we didn't say anything. Evelyn looked around at them. This bank, she said, bears my name on the highest level. I've worked every hour, fought every battle, signed every deal to ensure it remains a pillar of trust and fairness in this city. And yet, all of that means nothing if this is how we treat people when we think no one is watching. She turned back to Charles. As of this moment, you are relieved of your duties, Mr. Lanning. Permanently. His knees almost buckled. Please wait. This isn't. I'll be speaking directly to Human Resources, she continued. There will be an internal investigation. But let me be clear, the way you treated me is likely the way you've treated others who didn't have the benefit of power to protect them. And that stops today." She looked past him toward Tiffany, who was now visibly shaking. "As for you, Ms. Grant, you're suspended, effective immediately. HR will contact you. Your behavior toward me and toward other customers, some of whom I personally observed, was not just unprofessional. It was inhumane." Tiffany gasped, tears rushing to her eyes, but said nothing. The room was too quiet. There was no sympathy. No one came to her defense. Not even Ryan. Evelyn then addressed the entire lobby. "To those of you who stood by silently, I understand that it's easier to say nothing. But silence has never changed a system. Discomfort has never repaired damage. We all have a role to play in ensuring that fairness and dignity exist not just on company slogans but in every interaction, every decision, every moment." She took a breath, steadying herself. "I came here expecting judgment. I came here expecting resistance. But what I didn't expect was how deeply ingrained the bias would be in this place I helped build." Her eyes met Bradley's, the young teller. He had watched the entire thing, stunned and overwhelmed. "You were the only one who seemed uncomfortable with what was happening," she said softly. "And I noticed. That means something. And it will not be forgotten." He blinked, his eyes wide. He looked like he wanted to speak, but couldn't find words. Evelyn turned once more to the crowd and concluded, "This is no longer just about me. It's about how we treat those we assume have nothing. Because if we can't offer kindness to the ones we misunderstand, then we have no business offering financial services to anyone." And with that, she walked to the exit. No security. No police escort. No one dared stop her. The marble tiles beneath her steps no longer echoed with suspicion, but with reverence. Outside, the cold Chicago air hit her face like a baptism. But this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. By the time Evelyn Moore stepped out into the cold Chicago air, the news had already begun to spread. Someone in the lobby, nervous, wide-eyed, had recorded part of her speech on their phone. Just a 2-minute clip. But it was enough. Within an hour, it had been posted online with a caption that read, "CEO walks into her own bank in disguise. What happens next is a wake-up call." The clip exploded. By sunset, local news anchors were quoting her exact words, "If we can't offer kindness to the ones we misunderstand, then we have no business offering financial services to anyone." Hashtags trended. National outlets picked up the story. Evelyn Moore, already a recognized name in the financial world, became a symbol of something much larger. Inside the Lexington Federal Headquarters, phones rang non-stop. Journalists called. Lawmakers called. Community leaders called. But Evelyn didn't answer any of them. She had already turned her attention inward. The very next morning, an emergency all-staff memo was issued across every Lexington federal branch in the country. Its tone was sharp. Focused. Unapologetic. This institution will no longer tolerate latent bias, classism, or racism under any form. If you are unable to uphold our core values of dignity, respect, and equality, you do not belong here. Your uniform is not a shield for prejudice. Mandatory retraining was scheduled. Not optional. Not symbolic. Every employee from part-time receptionists to regional vice presidents would undergo a new behavioral standards program, built from the ground up under Evelyn's direct supervision. And this time, it wasn't corporate fluff. She brought in diversity scholars, psychologists, grassroots community leaders, even former clients who had filed past complaints. The sessions weren't just about compliance, they were about confronting blind spots. In her personal office, Evelyn reviewed every unresolved customer grievance from the past 3 years. She formed a small task force to re-examine every case involving allegations of disrespect, negligence, or profiling. One of those names belonged to Mrs. Hattie Lawrence, a retired bus driver whose mortgage modification had been denied without explanation. Another was David Ngoma, a software engineer from Nigeria whose wire transfers were constantly delayed for extra verification. Evelyn called each of them personally. And for every story, she listened. Carefully. Without rushing. She made notes. Asked questions. Promised accountability and followed through. Back at the downtown branch, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. Charles Lanning's nameplate was gone from his office. The walls where his awards had once hung now stood bare. Employees spoke in hushed voices not out of fear, but reflection. Bradley Novak, the young teller, was approached quietly by HR and invited to join the company's new internal ethics liaison team. "I'm not sure I'm qualified," he said, surprised. "You are," the email replied simply, "because you noticed." As for Tiffany Grant, the suspended client associate, she was given a choice: resign, or enroll in a 6-month rehabilitation and mentorship program designed to help employees unlearn harmful behavior and biases. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she went home and watched the full footage of that day on repeat. The way she laughed. The way she whispered. The way she looked at Evelyn like she was a stain on her carpet. She couldn't look away from her own actions. 3 days later, she showed up to the program. Quiet. Humble. Ashamed but willing to learn. Community reaction was equally profound. Nonprofits reached out to partner with Lexington Federal. Advocacy groups shared Evelyn's speech in seminars and workshops. A university even requested permission to include the story in a case study on ethical leadership. But not all feedback was glowing. Some accused Evelyn of staging the event. Others called her approach too extreme or overcorrective. Evelyn responded only once via an op-ed published in the Chicago Tribune: "If holding people accountable makes us uncomfortable, it's because we've normalized cruelty in silence. My job is not to preserve comfort. It's to preserve dignity for everyone." By the end of the quarter, customer satisfaction scores at Lexington Federal saw a 28% increase. But for Evelyn, the numbers were secondary. What mattered most were the letters she now received, not complaints, but thank you notes. From customers. From former employees. Even from staff at other banks, saying her actions gave them the courage to speak up or do better. In one letter, a 16-year-old girl from Detroit wrote, "My mom cleans offices at night. She cried when she saw your video. She said someone finally said what she's felt her whole life. Thank you for showing that people like us matter." Evelyn read it 3 times. Then she folded it neatly and tucked it into a drawer in her desk alongside a small, worn photograph of her late father in his work boots. That night, as she stood by the window of her high-rise office, looking out at the glowing city skyline, Evelyn Moore understood something with absolute clarity. Real power doesn't come from your title. It comes from what you do with it. And she was just getting started. 3 weeks after the incident at the Chicago branch, on a quiet afternoon in the executive suite of Lexington Federal, a familiar name appeared on Evelyn Moore's calendar. Tiffany Grant. Referred by Human Resources through the Internal Rehabilitation and Accountability Program, Tiffany arrived looking like a different person. Gone were the meticulously styled hair and expensive blazers. She wore a simple button-down shirt, no makeup, her face marked with exhaustion and sincerity. Evelyn didn't keep her waiting. The office door opened. Tiffany stepped in. They sat across from each other not as CEO and suspended employee, but as two people carrying the weight of vastly different journeys. Tiffany took a slow breath. "Before I say anything else, I want to apologize," she began, her voice raw. "There's no excuse for what I did." Evelyn nodded gently, saying nothing. Tiffany's fingers twisted tightly in her lap. "I wasn't thinking. I acted on instinct, and instinct I now realize was shaped by the environment around me, by assumptions I never questioned. But it wasn't unintentional. It was a choice. And I made the wrong one. Silence followed. Evelyn responded slowly, but her voice carried warmth. I didn't walk into that bank hoping to catch someone. I went because dozens of letters told me something was broken, that kindness had become conditional. That people were being judged by their shoes, not their stories. Tiffany's eyes shimmered with emotion. I looked at you and saw someone I assumed didn't belong. I thought, she's here to cause trouble. But now I see that the only trouble was my own mindset. Evelyn tilted her head, studying her. Do you know what made me feel less angry at you that day? Tiffany shook her head. It was your face when I walked out, Evelyn said. You weren't defensive. You weren't combative. You were afraid. Not because of consequences, but because, I think, you saw yourself clearly for the first time. Those words hit hard. But Evelyn didn't come to destroy people. She didn't believe in punishment as retribution. She believed in restoration, but restoration could only begin when someone was brave enough to face their reflection. I'd like to propose something, Evelyn said, leaning back slightly. Not because I need you to repay what you did, but because I believe mistakes can become catalysts for change. Tiffany straightened in her seat, listening. I want you to help me build a new program, the First Look Project. A training initiative for frontline employees, one that forces them to experience the role of the customer, both as the polished executive and the working-class janitor. I need someone who has stood on both sides of the line. Someone who understands firsthand how bias looks and how it feels. You're more qualified than anyone. Tiffany's breath caught. You want me back? Not as you were, Evelyn replied, offering a soft smile. But as someone who leads others into awareness. Tiffany's voice trembled. I don't think I deserve that. It's because you don't think you do, Evelyn said, that you actually might. Elsewhere, in a small apartment on the edge of the city, Charles Lanning sat alone, watching a news segment on Evelyn Moore's sweeping reforms. He had lost everything: his title, his reputation, the respect he once commanded. But what he hadn't lost, Evelyn believed, was the one thing that truly mattered: the capacity to change. No one had asked Charles to return. But a few weeks later, a handwritten letter arrived at Evelyn's desk. I used to think leadership meant having the last word. Now I realize it means knowing when to listen. I'm sorry. And if there's any way I can contribute to this healing process, I ask humbly for the chance. Evelyn didn't respond immediately. But she kept the letter. She placed it beside another one from a 16-year-old girl in Detroit, whose mother, a night custodian, had cried watching Evelyn's video, saying, "Finally, someone stood up for people like me." To Evelyn, the journey had never been about eliminating those who got it wrong. It was about awakening those who had been asleep in their privilege. As she once told her executive team during a closed-door meeting, we don't need a perfect workforce. We need a brave one. People willing to look inward and choose to be better. That was the real victory. Not in firing, but in planting seeds and watching them grow. 6 months had passed since the day Evelyn Moore walked into a marble-lined branch of her own bank and shattered the illusion of progress with nothing but presence, poise, and painful honesty. But by now, no one referred to it as that day at the branch. They called it the shift. Inside Lexington Federal, it had become a landmark in the company's culture, a reference point in onboarding packets, staff training, even annual evaluations. New hires were told Evelyn's story before learning the basics of loans and portfolios. Veteran employees referred to moments as either before the shift or after the shift. But the transformation didn't stay within the walls of Lexington Federal. It began to spread. The American Bankers Association reached out for a partnership. Evelyn agreed, on one condition, that the initiative be more than branding. It had to involve real, measurable change. She wanted third-party ethics audits, anonymous reporting tools for customers, and a cross-bank database of conduct violations that couldn't be quietly buried by HR departments. To the surprise of many, especially her critics, other banks agreed. The pressure from the public was mounting. No one wanted to be the bank that didn't follow Evelyn Moore's example. No CEO wanted to be in a viral video, held up against the one woman who had walked through fire and turned it into policy. Then came the Equity Standard Act, a bipartisan bill drafted by community leaders and policy consultants, many of whom cited Evelyn's approach as inspiration. It proposed national regulations requiring all federally insured financial institutions to conduct annual audits on bias, accessibility, and customer treatment. Evelyn testified before Congress in a navy blue suit and no script. Her speech was simple. Financial systems are the beating heart of our society. But a heart that favors only one side of the body eventually fails. What we're doing isn't just about dignity. It's about survival. It's about making sure every person who walks into a bank walks out with their humanity intact. Her words brought silence to the room. Not applause. Something deeper. Something reflective. Back at Lexington Federal, the internal culture had shifted permanently. The First Look project, which began as a training exercise, had expanded into an immersive experience. Employees shadowed janitorial staff for a day, attended sessions on unconscious bias with community leaders, and sat through customer panels featuring clients from underserved neighborhoods. They didn't just learn how to serve, they learned why service mattered in the first place. Those who once scoffed now listened. Those who once dismissed now leaned in. And among them was Tiffany Grant. No longer a front desk face, she was now the Director of Human Impact and Culture, reporting directly to Evelyn. Every new initiative, every shift in training, every structural reform ran through her hands. It hadn't been easy. There were days when Tiffany still cried behind her office door, ashamed of the woman she used to be. But Evelyn never judged her for the past. She only asked one thing: use it. Don't erase it. Let it be the reminder that helps you guide others. And Tiffany did. As for Charles Lanning, he wasn't rehired. But Evelyn invited him to join the board of a new nonprofit arm of the bank, the Open Door Initiative, aimed at rebuilding trust between financial institutions and disenfranchised communities. Charles accepted. Not for redemption. Not for reputation. But because for the first time in his career, he truly understood the cost of silence. One afternoon, after delivering a talk at a local credit union, Charles stood beside Evelyn and quietly said, "You didn't destroy me, you know. You unburied me." Evelyn smiled gently. Sometimes the hardest ground yields the deepest roots. In the 7th-floor conference room at Lexington Federal's headquarters, a new plaque was mounted to the wall. It read, "This space is dedicated to every voice that was once ignored. May it echo with courage, not complacency. Evelyn Moore." Above it hung the photo that had once circulated internally, a candid shot of Evelyn from the day of the shift. Hooded sweatshirt. Faded jeans. Quiet defiance in her eyes. It remained unedited. Unpolished. Unforgettable. That image wasn't just a reminder of what had happened. It was a declaration of what would never be allowed to happen again. And every day, as Evelyn walked past it on her way to meetings, to mentoring sessions, to policy hearings, or simply to check in with staff, she would pause, even if only for a second. To remember. Not who she was. But why she did what she did. Because a title never gave her that power. But the choice to use it for others did. Her name was Jada Reynolds. 19 years old. First-generation college student. Daughter of a seamstress and a bus driver. She'd grown up in South Side Chicago, in a neighborhood where banks didn't smile, they surveilled, where overdraft fees weren't just annoying, but devastating. For most of her life, Jada associated banks with rejection. She remembered being 12 when she accompanied her mother to cash a paycheck at a local branch. The teller hadn't even looked up, just waved her off and said, "We don't cash handwritten payrolls." Her mother had walked out quietly, holding back tears. That moment had shaped Jada's idea of how the world worked. Until Evelyn Moore changed it. Jada hadn't been in the Lexington Federal lobby the day of the shift, but she'd watched the viral video over and over, sometimes late at night between shifts at the student center. Something about Evelyn's quiet strength, the way she refused to raise her voice yet demanded the room, stuck with her. Here was a woman who looked like her aunt, like her neighbor, like her mom on a Sunday afternoon, but who walked like a general in a room full of cowards. For the first time, Jada saw someone who didn't just belong in the banking world, she redefined it. One night, she wrote Evelyn a letter. She never expected a response. Just writing it felt healing enough. Dear Ms. Moore, I didn't grow up thinking I could walk into a bank and be treated with dignity. Watching you changed something in me. I'm studying finance now. I want to be the kind of person you were that day. If no one else says it loud enough, thank you for making room for someone like me. She mailed it. Forgot about it. Until, 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived at her dorm. Inside was a handwritten note, Jada, I see you. And the room isn't just for you, it's incomplete without you. When you're ready, we're waiting, Evelyn. Folded within was an invitation to join the EM Fellowship, a new mentorship program launched by Lexington Federal, aimed at nurturing young leaders from underserved communities into future roles across finance, policy, and ethics. There were only 20 spots. Jada had one. She met Evelyn for the first time on a rainy Thursday morning in a high-rise conference room overlooking Lake Michigan. Jada had been rehearsing what to say, palms sweating, heartbeat like a snare drum. But when Evelyn entered the room dressed not in designer armor but in a cream sweater and black flats, she smiled and said, "So you're Jada." Jada almost forgot how to speak. "Yes, ma'am. I can't believe I'm here." Evelyn sat across from her. "I can." The two talked for an hour. Not about stocks. Not about macroeconomics. But about the power of presence. About showing up in rooms that weren't designed for you, and changing the furniture. "You don't have to fight to belong," Evelyn said. "You belong because your story is the blueprint this place forgot it needed." From that moment, Jada changed. She asked more questions in class. Spoke up during campus forums. She interned at Lexington's South Side branch and designed an accessibility guide for first-time banking customers. That guide, once just a student project, became part of Lexington's national onboarding kit. Jada wasn't just learning leadership. She was becoming it. 1 year later, during Lexington Federal's annual conference, Evelyn took the stage before a packed ballroom of executives, partners, and policy leaders. When it came time to introduce the newest class of EM Fellows, Evelyn stepped aside and gestured to the podium. Jada walked up. Not as a shadow of Evelyn Moore, but as the next fire. She looked out at the crowd and said, "You all know her story. But I'm here because of what she did after the cameras stopped rolling. Because when the world moved on to the next trending headline, she kept building." A pause. "I used to think people like me had to wait for someone to open the door. But she showed me how to build the door, place the hinges, and write 'Welcome' on the frame." The room erupted in applause. Evelyn, standing to the side, smiled not proudly, but peacefully. Because she knew now, the shift wasn't just cultural or structural. It was generational. And the story of Lexington Federal, of redemption and courage and radical empathy, wouldn't end with her. It would grow through people like Jada. People who once stood outside the system, now standing tall at the helm of it. 5 years had passed. And still, the echoes of that single morning in the Chicago branch lingered not as scandal or spectacle, but as a living standard. Lexington Federal had become the benchmark. Other institutions followed. A network of financial equity watchdogs first met with skepticism was now commonplace. University lectures referenced the shift alongside landmark moments in civil rights and corporate accountability. In government, new policy frameworks bore Evelyn's fingerprints, often unacknowledged, but unmistakable. But Evelyn? She never chased legacy. She returned, instead, to the work. Each morning, she arrived before the sun, her worn leather journal in hand. She visited the break rooms, not boardrooms. She learned the names of every janitor, every clerk, every teller. She still reviewed customer complaints personally, though few now escaped the empathy-first protocol implemented company-wide. She refused interviews. She declined awards. She believed real change wasn't what made headlines. It was what stayed invisible once the cameras were gone. But time, relentless as ever, moved forward. And one spring afternoon, Evelyn stood at the window of her office, top floor, southeast corner, where the light always hit soft after 4 p.m., and stared out over the Chicago skyline. She could see the branch where it all began from here. The same revolving doors. The same marble columns. She thought of her parents. Her father's calloused hands, steady even after 12-hour shifts. Her mother's quiet humming as she folded uniforms in their cramped kitchen. She remembered the first time she was told, "This world isn't made for people like you." And how, somehow, she'd decided, "Then I'll remake the world." A soft knock broke her thoughts. It was Morgan, her longtime assistant. "They're ready for you downstairs." Evelyn turned. "All set?" Morgan nodded. "Packed house. Some of the original fellows are here. Even Jada flew in." Evelyn smiled. Of course she did. This wasn't a press conference. Not a board meeting. It was the closing ceremony, a quiet moment among colleagues and partners marking Evelyn's official retirement from her role as CEO. She had built something strong. Now it was time to step back and watch it stand. As she descended the marble staircase into the main atrium, the room fell silent, not out of obligation, but out of reverence. There were no cameras. No applause tracks. Just real people standing on real ground, changed by a very real woman. Jada was the first to approach. She hugged Evelyn tightly, then whispered, "You said we didn't need permission to take our place. But I still want to say thank you, for giving us the courage to do it." Evelyn stepped back, brushing a strand of silver hair from her face. "You were always going to find it," she replied. "I just made sure no one took it from you first." She turned to the podium, looking out over the crowd of friends, former critics, students, executives, even customers she once helped anonymously from behind her quiet disguise. "I was never meant to lead forever," she said. "I was meant to clear the way." Her voice remained calm. "But don't mistake my departure for the end of something. If we've done this right, I leave behind a system that doesn't rely on me to remind you of people's worth." She gestured gently across the room. "Because now, you know it. You've lived it. You've seen what dignity looks like when it walks in wearing sneakers and a hoodie." A ripple of knowing laughter moved through the crowd. She smiled. "Never forget," Evelyn said, her voice soft but clear. "Every title you hold is borrowed. Every seat you occupy is a trust. And every human being who walks through your door is not a transaction, they are a mirror. Reflect wisely." And with that, she stepped down. No fanfare. No fireworks. Just warmth, silence, and the knowledge that something had truly changed and would stay changed. That evening, long after the atrium had emptied, Evelyn sat alone in her office one last time. She took out her leather journal, flipping to the final page. It was blank, save for a single sentence she wrote slowly, carefully. "Power is not what you hold. Power is how gently you use it to lift others." She closed the journal, stood, and placed it on her desk. The lights of the city pulsed softly outside. And somewhere, far below, a young girl was walking into a bank for the first time, unsure, nervous, and hopeful. She would be met with kindness. Because Evelyn Moore had walked first.